Good afternoon. What I'd like to do today is just take you through a little bit about Unilever, the company that I have worked for some time. My name is Roger Leech. I am currently the Operations Director for our longer term research programme in Unilever. And one of the other responsibilities that I have is building what we call the science grid, which is a slightly different approach to our interaction with academic colleagues going forward, which I'll say a little bit more about as I go through the presentation. What I'd like to do is, as I say, give you an introduction to the company itself, talk to you a little bit about what we do in the field of open innovation, selecting partners, finding partners to work with. But clearly for a lecture series like this, it would be wrong of me not to cover off the sort of challenges that we want to try and solve in the foreseeable future. And I'll give you a flavour of those by giving you some illustrations of some of the recent products that have come through, which are starting to address some of the big challenges that we're trying to address. So, Unilever. Hopefully you can see that okay. Four categories: refreshment, foods, personal care and home care, a range of products underneath, and those numbers really give you a sort of a split in terms of the percentages of the size of each of those businesses. Unilever has an ambition and is building a larger presence in the personal care space, so if in a few years' time we would expect the foods element to be quite a bit smaller as we continue to build the personal care part of the business. We have a vision that actually covers the sort of selling of everyday products to consumers to satisfy their particular needs. The important bit for us in R&D is that last sentence: develop new ways of doing business that will allow us to double in size whilst reducing the environmental impact. This is now the core underpinning activity for our business. Our CEO is very clear that the only way we can actually get the global economy into a more sustainable nature is if business helps to lead that approach.
Is it possible to turn off one of the lights?
Yes, otherwise just a blank screen. Yeah. So as I say, we're doing our best now to actually sort of drive our business to actually create a sustainable future. And if we're successful, then we hope that as more and more businesses sort of take up this mandate, governments will be able to follow. There's obviously some big challenges to address, but the CEO has actually started to make some transitions in the way in which we operate. You can see from that our turnover in 2012 was just over 50 billion euros. That is about a 25% increase over the last 3 years. So we've had quite a successful last 3 years, which is somewhat strange for some businesses in the current environment of recession, but that is purely driven on the back of a very significant growth in developing and emerging countries. So where the actual growth has been maintained, of course, through the recession that's helped, that's actually hit the developed part of the world. And we have 14 brands now that bring in turnover of greater than 1 billion euros a year. Those sharp-sighted of you are counting the ones at the bottom. You'll notice there's only 13 there. The one that's actually joined the family very recently is Magnum, which is now a 1 billion euro brand, ice cream globally. So thanks to everyone's liking of that particular one that's joined the family. We actually have a number of challenges that we are actively looking at and working, and I just thought I'd summarise that on this chart. So basically you've got three main areas. You've got obviously emerging consumer areas and trends, particularly the new middle classes coming through in India and China, professional women starting to really come to the fore in those parts of the world as well. At the same time, you've got significant challenges to address: hygiene for the urban populations, which are increasing steadily as the rural populations decrease. And clearly we have a big challenge on producing functional products that used less water, because that for us is one of the key areas of our ability to actually move to a more sustainable business. Obviously, rapid digitalisation is proving to be a very, very strong motivator for many parts of business and industry in terms of the way in which we interact with consumers. So the whole of the development of that space is going to continue to increase and speed up. And as you can see, all of that is underpinned by the sustainability that we need to deliver across the whole of the business. As a result of that, at the end of 2010, the company created the Sustainable Living Plan, and as an initial target, it was agreed that we would look to deliver 3 areas of sustainability. 1, help 1 billion people to improve health and well-being. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that in terms of challenges ahead. Halve the environmental footprint of our products, which is one of the most significant challenges that we need to address, and sourcing 100% of our agricultural raw materials sustainably. That, again, is going to be a very, very significant challenge. I'll say a little bit more about that when I give you some examples. So really, this gives us a new platform on which we can actually operate with, looking for good partners to really work with to find some solutions in this space. We looked into end of 2010 where our environmental footprint really lay. This just gives a very quick summary around the greenhouse gases, water use and waste. As you can see, if you sort of cast your eye over those, we have a significant area to address on our raw material supply. We have a significant and even bigger area to address with our consumers, because most of water and energy is actually at the use with our consumers and not in our factories. So that in itself is a significant challenge to address. And obviously with the packaging, all the issues that come around packaging and waste, very important to actually start moving us. And I'll give you an example at the end about the sort of transition that our factories are now beginning to make in this space going forward. So, open innovation. I don't know how many of you sort of come across the general mantra that operates around open innovation, but the classic is want, find, get, manage, which basically says you spend time to actually determine with your business what they want. That's the hardest bit of the whole process. Often the definition of what business really is actually trying to achieve is very, very hard to determine, and if you start with the wrong want, then you've got no chance of actually finding solutions. The second bit about find, going out there, finding partners to actually work with. Third bit then, which these areas were actually defined by Gene Slavinsky in the US in following on the back of the open innovation approach that was driven there. And the word they use is get, which sounds a little bit raw. Our view is that it's actually the process of creating the contracts with partners so that both sides understand exactly where you're operating and what the benefits are to both sides. And finally, and just as importantly, is the manage. Is actually looking at how you develop those relationships so that you've got something that both sides can benefit from, but more importantly that they understand and people understand exactly how partners start to work and get benefit together. So want, find, get, manage, bigger, better, faster through partnerships. Classic mantra I think across the whole of the business these days. We want bigger innovations, we want them to be better than anything in the past, and we need to deliver them faster and faster. And that's really been the underpinning part of business, I would guess now, for many centuries, but it continues to grow very, very rapidly as we move forward. We do operate with a very wide selection of partners. I just to illustrate for you. Starting on the left, we've got supplier networks. We now have global agreements with 15 global supply partners. So we jointly work on challenges around the sustainability and the provision of raw materials. Likewise, we have, at the moment, we're working with about 110 universities globally. And each of those gives us different areas of input. But as we move towards the science grid that I mentioned at the start, that number will become a little bit more focused around a core set of universities near to our operating research labs that are based, 2 in the UK, 1 in Holland, 1 in the US, one in China and one in India. So those are where our R&D labs are located. Obviously, we've also been working on a number of alliances with joint ventures with other companies. The classic one that some of you may be aware of is the one with Pepsi, where they do all of the production of iced tea drinks globally and provide the distribution network from their drinks bottling plants. So that joint venture has been operating successfully, I think now for about 9 to 10 years, I think. So that's been going for quite some time. In terms of the way we operate, I mentioned that we had 6 global R&D labs. The one in Colworth is a bit like Mark was saying earlier on the video. That is an actual science park. So companies are coming onto that site. That's been operating now since 2004, 2005. And we now have 2 innovation hubs on the site, which is attracting a number of small to medium-sized businesses onto the site as a different model for interacting with us going forward. At the same time, at the bottom there, we have a big program working with entrepreneurs, not only entrepreneurs externally, but bringing entrepreneurs in to challenge our internal program. That's an important component for us. If we're going too slowly, we're not looking at the right areas, we bring an entrepreneur in who often takes an idea, goes away, and actually develops it to the next phase, the business thing, and reintegrates it into their plans. Scouting networks, some of those companies that you can see up there, Oakland, Euroncore, 9 Sigma, these are classic scouting companies that go hunting for opportunities, businesses, university areas, university departments that can act as partners. So when we've got a want, we actually sort of put it through that environment, and I'll say a little bit more about the way that process runs. We also have a corporate ventures wing, as well as a new business unit, the Ventures, Unilever Ventures based in London, Physic Ventures, which is the technology ventures side, operates out of San Francisco, and we operate quite a wide deal flow with businesses around the world. The original intention of that was to actually develop new businesses that we could consider. The problem is that venturing, it looks to make money out of the investment, and that doesn't always actually line up with trying to get businesses that you could integrate into your own. Often you buy and sell within a ventures environment, which hasn't been as successful as we'd have liked to integrate new opportunities, which is why we created a new business unit that goes the other route, creates a business, gets the venturing for it, but develops that within a more closely controlled environment within the organisation. Finally, right on the right, you've got non-government organisations, which of course are very important to us to check that we're going in the right direction. There is no point in us actually just sitting around saying, well, yeah, we're definitely getting more sustainable and everyone can see that we're sourcing our raw materials better. We need these agencies to really come and check and to challenge us. And as I'll mention to you later, when we talked about working on sustainable palm oil, Greenpeace were really good in their investigations to actually help us to identify which of those companies are actually producing sustainably and which of them maybe are not being quite so upfront about their approaches. So these groups are very important to us to actually act as a checkpoint. Clearly there's a wide range of different places that we can go hunting for partnerships. Up the left-hand axis there, you've got all the different ways in which new opportunities come into the organisation. Everything from ideas at the top down to sort of what we call base mature type opportunities down at the bottom. And along the base, all the different places that we can go hunting. Some of the most successful, our own industry is often a very successful place to hunt for new opportunities. It's surprising what we don't know in terms of the people who are operating around the world. But obviously going outside, small to medium-sized enterprises, startups, universities, everything. So, you know, the whole remit of different groups to look for partnerships. A very brief summary of the sort of approach that we take. We start, as I said, with the want. So across the top, those are the 3 wings of R&D, which is discover, design, and deploy. And then we define with the business what that want is. Once we've got that, we have a single page that we circulate internally. We do the internal due diligence to see who internally has the opportunity or the idea to solve it. At the same time, we talk to our global supply partners to see if they want to work with us to find a solution. If that doesn't work, then we go to an external agency. We brief up an external want brief that they will then go out hunting for, and the returns from that, once we've selected those partners and got the agreements in place, gives us the opportunity to sort of move our R&D forward. On the left-hand side, we also rely very heavily on personal networks. So the scouts, there are about 8 scouts in Unilever spread around the world. They have a target each year to make sure that they keep up to date their own personal networks. The idea being that they can bring in new ideas as they identify in local networks as well. And in addition, down the right there, we have Unilever.com with some of the challenges on there. I don't know if you've been there and had a look at any of those. I'll say a little bit about those in a moment. But anyone internally or externally can submit an idea. That was launched in March last year. First 6 months of that, we had over 1,000 submissions. So it was a very, very popular route for people to submit ideas. About 85, 90 of those are now internal, and we've got about 300 scientists now working on those submitted ideas to see whether they're going to be something we can take into the main part of the research program. I hope fairly soon I'll be able to sort of stand here and say, and here are some examples of where that whole process is all linked up. It hasn't done it yet. It's going to take a little bit further, a little bit more time to sort of work that through, but we're very encouraged by the responses that we're getting globally to the challenges that we have on the website. So to summarise all of the open innovation bit, this basically captures the whole position. On the left, you've got the outside-in approach, which working with scouting partners, suppliers, unsolicited leads, that brings new ideas into our organisation. The inside-out bit basically is the ventures bit that's looking out to the external world. The entrepreneurs bit of that is like a two-way arrow because it's both inside, into and out of. But more importantly these days is that bottom box, the co-creation. So working with strategic partners, whether that's academic partners or business partners, to actually jointly work together to find mutually beneficial solutions. And that is really something that's growing in an increasing strength as we go forward. Everything from our core business units to the new business unit in terms of finding opportunities for taking outside. And obviously, a company as big as ourselves, we tend to have a number of different open innovation models. There isn't one that absolutely works well for you. We keep on looking just for good models to take forward. Good ideas are always generate really good opportunities as we go through the process. So, to sort of finish off, I thought I'd sort of give you a flavour for the sort of challenges that are sort of coming through. I hope that some of these might ring a few bells, because the very last chart will show you the number of interactions that we've had with the university here over, I guess, the last 10 to 15 years. So I hope I haven't left anything too obvious off that. I'm sure if I have, then you'll mention that to me at the end. First of all, what areas do we really need to address? First of all, raw material sustainability. Clearly a very important area for us to actually sort of get more and more of our raw materials sustainable. Health and hygiene, all aspects of preventative healthcare. We're not competing with the pharma companies in curative healthcare. Our approach is through our foods and our personal care business. What can we do in preventative healthcare, particularly related to things like type 2 diabetes increases that are becoming a global epidemic at the moment. And the hygiene side, of course, very strong relationship to disease control and prevention of disease. So a very important area for us to address. Water. This is one of the core ones, of course. Clean water, of course, is very, very important. And we have a business now that has been in India for about the last 5 or 6 years, producing clean water for people's use without the use of any energy. So it's basically around different forms of filters to actually give clean water, so no power is required for that. And likewise, less water use. How do we reduce the amount of water? Again, I'll mention that in a moment, because one of our challenges is to look for ways in which we can reduce the amount of water that consumers use for things like showering, which strangely enough is one of the biggest challenges for us to help. I think I might have mentioned to some of you that the front runner at the moment is that we just make sure everyone has cold showers, because that'll reduce the time that you're in the showers. But there's a big consumer behaviour change required to make that work. Obviously, big area on packaging, probably one of the most complex areas, because you're not only talking about renewable packaging, all the different materials, all the different ways in which you can pack your products and get those out to market. Very, very important to us to actually both understand what we can do in that space, as well as find new ways of delivering that, so that consumers can actually make their own choices. We have run a number of experiments with consumers on things like refillable packs and stuff like that. It's really hard to make some of these transitions, because I'm not surprised necessarily, but consumers are quite reluctant to change in certain sectors if they don't feel that it's as convenient as it was. So there's a big change that's required to make that happen. Product structuring is an underpinning core strength in Unilever, and one that we continue to develop. So all aspects of product structuring, and again, I'll give you an example of that. New sustainable materials, so materials that we can routinely use that are not oil-based, and we can actually then develop a business that actually has the sustainable raw materials in them. Obviously, like everybody else, we want to leverage the omics, whether that's microbiomics or proteomics or genomics, whichever you want to take as your particular flavour. All of those are really pushing forward now, and underpin a lot of our partnerships with, particularly with the academic science. We're really keen on understanding in more detail what the benefits can be delivered from some of these science areas that have really been generated over the last 10 to 15 years. I mentioned about sustainable behaviour, and that's something again that is very important to us. We have to change the way consumers use products, and the way in which those are actually then operated around the world. And again, we have some examples of what can be done in that space. Clearly, advanced measurement, hugely important to us. One of the strengths, I think, of this university has been some of the associations that we've had here, looking at different aspects of measurement, all aspects from measuring skin, hair, etc., to products, formula, different emulsions. So vast range of different requirements in that space. And finally, of course, one of the key areas for us is having the computation and modelling to enable us to solve some of the big problems that we have to deal with. I think we probably all know now that the amount of data that's being generated is far in excess of the way that current computers are going to be able to keep up with the actual amount. And under those circumstances, how do we manage the data going forward? If I just took one example, if all of you have your DNA sequenced in a few years, that will be something that may be offered to you for £50 or so. It's getting quite competitive already. But if all of your information and just your DNA sequencing was held on computers, that would actually take up most of our ability to store data and manage data. And so we have to be much cleverer to take the bits that are important rather than the whole lot. What bits are important, who knows? Some examples. So I mentioned to you about palm oil. I suspect you've all read about the issues that revolve around palm oil. It's still a very important raw material to us. And what we need to do is to actually find sources of sustainable palm oil going forward for our business. And so obviously we work closely with plantations to actually find those plantations that are actually managing their businesses sustainably. But to actually make that happen, we have a round table for sustainable palm oil that has been in operation now for quite a few years, looking for the right way in which we can actually find that. At the same time, we partner with things like the World Wildlife Fund and Greenpeace, who, as I say, act as the police in this environment. But all of that says, how do we find sustainable palm oil? What we also need to do is to look at other raw materials. So we also have a program of work with a company called Solazyme, which is actually looking for renewables from algae. Obviously, the benefits of that sort of approach is that we can get to a certifiable, sustainable level of palm oil, but at the same time, we can look for alternatives that may replace palm oil in the longer term with sustainable sources from elsewhere. Some of you may have come across other areas of sustainable palm oil like krill. The Canadians are pursuing that one now quite vigorously as another source of sustainable oil. So a number of opportunities there going forward. Some of you may have come across this product which was launched, I guess 8 weeks ago, something like that. Which basically is a major innovation for us in the deodorant area, where what we've done is just compress the formulation into a smaller pack. So same amount of antiperspirant, same spray time, but all of that with half the amount of propellant. So the actual technology there has taken quite a number of years to actually sort of get. The important bit of all of that is the final little block at the bottom. So it says if 1 million users use it. I think it's a case of when. It's quite close now. 124 tons of carbon dioxide, so equal to a car travelling 22 times around the earth, will be saved by that compression. Likewise, enough aluminium to make a fair number of bikes as a comparison. So small changes in a global business make a huge change in the sustainability of that opportunity. Likewise, single rinse conditioners that came out about 2 years ago, where this particular example is in India, where the current practice, or the practice was to use 3 buckets of water to rinse. This formulation enables them to go through a single rinse step. 38% of Unilever's water footprint comes from laundry, so clearly it's something that we needed to address. Just putting in a single rinse step to a fabric conditioner saves billions of litres of water a year. So for us, again, very, very important to deliver something like this to the consumers. Interestingly enough, the consumers didn't change. So what they did was that they took the new product and they did 3 rinses. So what we actually had to do, we had to hire stadia in India and get as many people as we could into the stadia and train them and basically just show them that they could do it with a single rinse. So again, consumer behaviour change, absolutely key if you're hoping to succeed in this space. Some of you will be aware of the Hellmann's mayonnaise, and the fact that when you look at low-fat varieties, if you take fat out of any formulation, you have real issues with regard to structuring, obviously flavour, organoleptics, all of that kick in. A few years ago, we implemented the technology of using fibres, citrus fibres, and this raw material acts as a structuring agent which allows you to take the fat out of the formulation, but it also gives you all of the properties of a traditional mayonnaise. Well, I like to think that. I don't know how many of you have actually done the comparison, one side by side, but I suggest you try it. It's getting much, much closer. It's really hard taking fat out of a formulation, but it's really important, of course, to reduce the calorie load of our formulations as we go forward, so lighter varieties. And we have plans now using processing where we can actually be able to take even more fat out of the formulation by using new forms of processing as well. Some of the sorts of fibres that we're using, you can see in the bottom right-hand electron micrograph. Likewise, in ice cream, coming back to our favourite Magnum, the use of cold rollers, which is a mechanism by which we can actually create quite carefully controlled ice cream formula. This kicked in about 2 years ago. Until that moulded products was always the process, but in this, the cold roller moulds that actually enable us with liquid nitrogen cooling enable us to actually sort of make much better ice cream formulations. You can see the wording on that was done by my marketing colleagues, so the final line was clearly down to their expertise. But the opportunity space here is, again, you can do far more with the formulation using this sort of technology. The website that I mentioned to you on the unilever.com, I just pulled off the wants that are currently on that site. So everything cleaning up fat, so removing fat off clothing, natural colours, sugar reduction, not surprise, safe drinking water, fighting viruses, better packaging. All of these are covering the areas that we're really interested in. Again, sustainable washing, less salt, amazing toothpaste. So any of you experience in the toothpaste area or got an idea for how you could make it even better, then there you go. Because we still have one of our biggest successes, or one of the industry's biggest successes, has been the move of the population from the number of carious lesions that were there in the before 1960s to the actual population shift to healthier teeth has been a major step, and gave us indications that you can change population dynamics in these sort of areas if you have the right messages and formulation. And clearly that needs to continue, because we still have to address some of those issues going forward with people's use of different products and the way in which they clean their teeth. Preserving food naturally, storing renewable energy. You wouldn't think a company like us would have any interest in this. You'd think the utilities companies, and we talk to them in this. But of course, around the world, one of the biggest challenges for people is how they can generate power locally, store it, and then use it to heat water or to drive their cooking or any other process in their homes, probably recharge their mobiles. That's a real opportunity space, because if we can store power locally in a cost-effective manner, then clearly it will be a very strong underpinning of energy constraint going forward. Sustainable showering, which is what I mentioned to you before. We've been doing some work with loggers to actually track the amount of water people use in the developed part of the world, because we had no idea how much water people used, and we had no idea how comparative that was with people having baths, for example. And you'll be pleased to know that if you have a shower, you are using the same amount of water as if you have a bath. The average time in a shower is 8 minutes for people, and it would take you almost exactly the same length of time to fill a bath. So we're not saving water by using showering. However, although that's the average time, I'm sure we can make that shift. I mean, to me, 8 minutes seems like an awfully long time to be in a shower. Some of the data from some of the information fed back was quite bizarre in terms of length of time. I couldn't believe a hot water tank would hold so much water for some of the times that it was actually running water in the shower. But this sort of information, that's where I talked to you about measurement. Really important to us to understand the problem before we can then start to address that. Changing consumer behaviour, so the use of devices. I mean, you're all aware of the utilities company giving you devices to look at the power in different parts of your home. We need to be as creative for devices that will enable you to use less energy or use less water in use of products. So again, we need ideas for how that might happen. In terms of academic networks, I thought I'd just give you one quick example. Traditionally, business tends to sit in the middle and has a problem that they then put out to a range of different either academic groups or businesses. We're beginning to move ourselves, and the illustration here, we're moving ourselves out of that network to be a partner rather than sitting in the middle. So with this particular example, some of you will be aware of the Unilever Cambridge Centre for Molecular Informatics. So this is where we do a lot of our modelling work for new materials. They then work closely with the Centre for Materials Discovery in Liverpool, which of course is where all of our high throughput formulation discovery work is now being done at the university. And at the same time, we've just signed a framework with the Hartree, the Blue Gene computer there, so that our partners can use that to actually crunch the data that's needed for the work that they do. And obviously the benefits there, you share the cost of investments, you have faster speed of turnaround of new opportunities, you get the access to the levels of expertise in the different centres, and you get the combined expertise is starting to bounce ideas off each other. I mean, to a certain extent, it's sort of the way that things like the N8 ideally would generate more interactivity and build greater strength in the UK universities as a whole. Our ambition has always been to work with universities for the longer term science. We really don't want universities coming short term. We want to develop the underpinning science that we can use, and then we can then work with the universities to really then start to pick off the applications that we can actually then move into market. I'd just say very quickly a little bit about our sustainable manufacturing. So from between 2011 and 2012, this is an example, it's a continuous process of saving in manufacturing, but you can see there that CO2 emissions from energy were cut by 15.5% of the comparison between 2011 and 2012 last year, so 260,000 tonnes of CO2. Major saving for us. Total reduction in water, 7.1%, and this is all per tonne of production. So a saving of 1.4 million cubic metres of water last year over 2011. Reduce the amount of waste, so we're now 133 of our 252 factories are not sending waste to landfill. And waste disposal costs decreased by €1 million a year. Yes, €1 million a year. Year on year. So the whole process then of reuse and recycling, obviously very important. And all of that whilst our production increased last year. So production went up by 4.3%. So when you start to look at that, and that's the sort of thing that we have to do year on year on year as we start to make a real impact in this space. And as I said, I'd finish with a list of activities that I found in our systems that we've worked with the university here over about the last 10 years. If I've missed something, please mention it to me later. Major interactions here on things like measurement opportunities, modelling, aspects of chemistry and multi-scale analysis. So we have had some really good associations with the university. I'm sure going forward that can be built even more as we have obviously a very major research presence in Port Sunlight, and we really need to work closely with academic groups to enable us to keep the level of science up to scratch. So that was, if you like, a very quick run through of who we are, what we're doing, what we would like to do, and as I say, I'll be more than happy to try and answer any questions you might have. In terms of just finishing, I thought I'd just say one final bit, which is about our learnings on what works or doesn't work with interacting with partners. Again, Gene Slavinsky from the US said, a partnership is not like a marriage. And we thought, okay, where's he going with this? And he said, it's like having a teenage son where both parents and son have to work with each other, but both want to get out of each other's hair as quickly as possible. And under those circumstances, he built his basis of partnerships with business and industry and academics on that backbone. And so, how do you make these things work? One, have challenging problems. Clearly, that's going to be something that will be engaging for all sides. Obviously, a very open interaction. That's one of the reasons I'm building the science grid, because once we've got each of those frameworks in place, we can have complete open discussions at any level within the university, with any level within Unilever, under confidentiality. So you don't have to then put NDAs in place every time you want to have a chat. Obviously, Very strong component, mutual respect for capabilities of each operating group. And one thing that we are beginning to find more and more, location is very, very important. In the past, there have been sort of phases when senior guys in any organisation say, well, the best centre is Cambridge, you must work with Cambridge because they're the best. And then you say, yes, but if you actually got someone down the road, you can actually go down there 10 minutes in your car or half an hour, whatever it is, you actually can build a far better relationship than having to be on the end of a phone or a flight or something like that. So location, I think, is becoming more of an important component in actually building strong partnerships. Obviously, the contract bit, so both sides really know what's going on. I couldn't quite relate that back to the lad and his parents, but maybe it has something to do with the sort of accepted levels of behaviour that they would expect from that relationship. Sorry, the use and ownership of IP. If, as a university, you wish to take IP and exploit it in the areas in which we work, you are our competitor. And if that's the case, then it's really difficult to have a really good partnership. If, however, we exploit the IP, you get to use the IP in other areas that we don't have a direct relationship with, then both sides can benefit by that interaction. So it's looking at the way in which IP is actually managed within that relationship that's very important for a good working operation. Obviously, if you sign a contract and say, right, go away for 2 years, work on the problem, and we'll meet up in 2 years and we'll actually review what happened, doesn't work. Because by the time 2 years have gone by, you'll have done fantastic work, and almost certainly Unilever have gone off in some other direction. So the important bit is regular interaction, so that there's always a good understanding of all aspects of what's happening. Obviously, the timescales. Our biggest problem in R&D is helping to keep our marketeers up to speed with what we're doing. Because that's obviously a very important component. They tend to think that new science and technology will be delivered yesterday, and that all they need to do is just sort of work out the brand exercise of how they'll sell it, and everything will be fine. It does take time to go through that process. And obviously managing expectations, working with new areas of science and technology. We need to work with big partners when we come to exploit. So small businesses are great in terms of building and inputting good new technologies, but the moment that technology is proven, almost always we'll have to go to a big partner to make this work. You can't, if you're a small business, produce 400 bits of kit for our Magnum ice cream lines around the world. You might be able to produce 1 or 2 each year, but we need, say, 400 at a time if we're changing a step in the process. So that sort of expectation, managing that expectation, really important. Anyway, sorry, I've gone a little bit over there, but I hope that's given you a flavour for who we are and what we do. And as I say, happy to answer any questions. Yeah, I mean, Gene always works on the basis that the business is the parent and the teenager is who they're working with. So that's the academic group, small to medium-sized enterprise. I'm not purporting that that model is anything that I would sign up to, but
anybody else got a quick question? Roger, can I ask, you talked obviously a lot about science and technology, and predominantly that's the audience here, but you do talk about consumer behaviour. You gave the example where you launched a product that didn't work because
consumer didn't change. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you improve on that? How do you get that expertise into product development?
One of the things that we're doing is, first of all, putting in place measurement actually at the point of use. So we now have quite a number of devices where we can actually measure when people wash their hands, how they use a toothbrush, how much water they use in the shower, all of that, because all of that sort of data is required so that you can actually start to look at the change you need to make. The follow-on from that, of course, is to actually make the models you need to actually convince the consumer of the benefit of making a change. So we've done some quite big trials in Africa about hand washing, and actually looking at when people wash their hands, how they wash them, where the water is, and all the rest of this. So now we can start to target that to enable people to make it much easier for them to wash their hands, having been to the loo or whatever, and then actually then start to deliver that sort of change environment.
Just out of interest, have any of those monitoring devices invoked sort of consumer change anyway?
Yes.
They know they're there? Okay.
Yeah, so what you do is you put them in to a set of households, normally 3,000 to 4,000 houses, and then you leave them with them for a year, and you only start measuring it until the final quarter. Yeah, so you wait until it's gone, completely second nature to them. And the products aren't obvious. So a bar of soap, hollow out the middle, put the logger in, close the soap bar up, give that, and then it's quite easy. People forget about them quite quickly.
On that note.